me about development of WordPress. It's an honor to have Kate Moore, and this is going to be Christine with a case study. And so today is going to be about communication between developers and designers. And so I'm just going to leave the word to Kate.
Hi, so I'm Kate Moore, and I'm going to be talking to you about why we can't always get along. So this seems to be an issue for a lot of developers and designers. Everyone gets quite frustrated with each other, I think, in my experience anyway. And I'm going to talk to you guys about how to make that relationship a little bit easier. I'm talking to you about this because I've been a graphic designer for 8 years, and I started, I became a theme developer 2 years ago. I got into WordPress sort of because I was writing a blog that was in Blogspot and was really obnoxious, and I started trying to teach myself to code, and that wasn't going very well. So I took the program at PCIT and then got really into WordPress, partly because of Christine. I talked to her about it before I got in that program and got really into it. So what you're going to hear from me is why I think this issue is worth talking about, workflow or process to make it less difficult to communicate between developers and designers, and a few general tips for working together. I figured when I got into WordPress development that because I was also a designer that this would not be a frustrating relationship or process for me, and I was completely wrong. I work with a designer quite a lot. I do the development for her, and we've worked some kinks out and have a fairly decent system, although we still, argue about pixels and kerning and that kind of thing on a fairly regular basis. So without further ado, this is why I think it's important to talk about this. Designers and developers think of the web page differently. I'm going to get into more detail about that in a sec. Designers also don't understand how WordPress works. Developers made up of different files interact. Just know what the back and that's about it. Designers also don't know, believe it or not, a lot of them don't know about headings and paragraphs. What a heading is concerned, but as far as HTML is concerned, they often don't understand what that is. Developers often don't get involved in the website. It's too late, in my opinion. Often we come in after the site's already been designed. That's a problem. Designers are often better equipped to manage and create the information architecture of a site than designers. This is going to save you a lot of time if you get involved in this step early on. And I hate to say this last one, but developers tend to have a reputation of being non-communicative, so sometimes designers go into these relationships thinking that they're already going to have a tough time, and it's our job to sort of talk them out of that. That's been my experience anyway. So, I was talking about how we look at pages, and we look at them quite differently. So this is an example of a website that I'm launching next week. And I didn't design it. This was designed by someone else. And this is how a designer sees a page. It's a page, it has nice typography, nice images, everything's laid out properly. But when we look at this as developers, we see a page where we don't see a page, we see this. So header PHP, page PHP, and maybe content PHP, footer PHP, and no sidebar, yay. And then we also see a bunch of CSS that we're going to have to code a pop-up video. You might have missed that in that short time I had the slide up. There's going to be an opt-in, and there's a whole whack of plugins that we're going to have to throw in there. So this looks pretty simple to a designer, but this is how a developer actually, a WordPress developer, is going to look at this. So one of the issues I think designers don't understand is that WordPress is sort of mix and match. So I think a good place to start is to explain to the designer that they can swap things in and out in a modular fashion. So For example, the footer can go with both page B and the home page. Footer B can go with both single post and the category. Doesn't necessarily mean header A has to stick with footer A. Page, etc. It's sort of a simplified way of explaining that relationship that I'm sure most of you understand. So shift around. I'm using modules. What I really mean is files, but I think better than files. So ideally, you want to, the header, sidebar, and footer can easily be swapped out on the following parts of the WordPress theme. So single PHP, page PHP, archive PHP, etc. All the ones that are similar to that one. Index PHP, so the blog. If the blog is not the homepage, then front page PHP, and then page templates. You can also swap the headers and the footers out. Those are the most easy points for that to happen. So explaining this to, yes, make that great header, but make sure that it only particular parts of the website. So bearing that in mind, here's the process that I've sort of worked out with the designer I work with to make things a little bit more smooth when we work together. So first things first, I think the developer should be involved when you're actually acquiring the client. So if possible, a lot of us get work from designers calling us and saying, I've designed this website, can you please now build it for me? Or my client needs a developer. That's sort of how that relationship goes, for me anyway. So if possible, you want to talk to the client yourself before they hire you, or before the designer hires you as a subcontractor, if that's the way it's going to work. If the designer, for some reason, you're not able to talk to the client, these are the questions you get the designer to ask them, and the questions that you should ask them if you do get to speak to the client. So what type of functionality do they need? That's sort of an obvious one, but if the client is looking for a lot of bells and whistles, that's really going to dictate the design, obviously. So you can start thinking about how you're going to code this design that the developer is giving you, or the designer, sorry. D words, I'm going to swap those. What are the client's expectations for the diversity of design? So I'm not sure that a client will exactly understand this question in this language, but what I mean by that is I've had clients who want, they've seen a style of blog that has a different header on every page you go to, which I find annoying, but that's just my opinion. So, they know already that they want 10 different headers and 4 footers and all that kind of stuff. So it's good to sort of know what they're looking for early on in the process. Helps your estimating, and it also helps know what you're getting into. How many pages do they want? Because clients also think of websites in pages. They don't think of them in modules like I'm suggesting we try to get designers to think of them. I think this is an important question to ask because you want to make sure that they're not putting, extra pages up there that they don't need. This is sort of a #1 thing I try to get my clients to do, is not make so many pages on a website. I think a lot of people are stuck in the, 10 years ago we used to have an about, and then there would be about the studio and about me and about every person that works here and that kind of stuff. Try to get them to pare down. And then a last question that I like to ask, just so that I make sure that they actually are giving me all the information I want, is do they need things like legal pages, thank you after opt-in, or thank you after purchase? That kind of stuff clients always forget, and it often is a totally different design style that you may end up using for those pages. It's usually going to be a pretty simple, straightforward design, but it's still another header or footer or sidebar that you have to build. Second step is to talk to the designer after you've talked to the client, obviously. So this is a good one just to make sure you both talk to the client. Everyone is expecting the same thing out of this project. And then you have to ask yourself, do you want to actually take the client? If they seem like they're kind of all over the place, then maybe you don't, because that means that the design communication between the client, the designer, and the developer is just going to be hairy. Make sure that, this is also a good point to make sure that your estimate or flat rate flat rate is high enough to accommodate this level of service. So the level of service that I'm about to explain in this process, it requires a little bit more upfront work from the developer perspective. So this is, number 3 is I think the main place where developers should get involved with designers to make this relationship easier. I don't know, as a developer, who of you get involved in the information architecture, or is it the designer that does it? Okay, so I'm assuming then that the designer is dealing with this particular step instead of you. I think it makes a lot more sense for the developer to take the lead in this step, or at least be super involved. So what I mean by that is to create an information architecture that makes sure that everyone is on the same page and you're actually dealing with the same website, is basically what I'm getting at. So, for example, 2 weeks before the designer that I work with starts working with our client, I will email the client, set up a meeting over Skype to talk about information architecture. They usually don't know what I mean when I say information architecture, so I will say, what pages do you want on your website? And eventually we get to this. So this is the information architecture for this photography website that I'm sort of showing you throughout this presentation. The dotted lines are at the top there. Home goes to personal branding and photography. That means that there are buttons somewhere on the home page that go to those pages. The thank you page is for the opt-in that's on every page, pretty much. And then there are some pages that lead to other pages. This is a pretty simple website from a information architecture perspective anyway. So this is what I would send to the client and designer to make sure that we all agree this is what's going to be on the website. But this is what I'm really thinking is, okay, home, we have our front page PHP. I'm going to have a page PHP. I'm going to probably have 2 page templates, because through the course of my conversation with that client, I've realized that the personal branding photography page and the wedding photography page was going to have a lot of really particular information. So I knew I was going to use advanced custom fields for that. And so that was going to have its own template. The blog always ends up with index PHP and single PHP. And then I know I'm building a taxonomy page for the branding testimonials and wedding testimonials, because she wants those organized. That, of course, leads me to having a custom post type for those. So looking at my information architecture, I know that I'm dealing with these particular files. And then I also know that because we talked about it, she wants a footer that has an opt-in in it, one that doesn't, and then another whole footer that has this press section and an opt-in. So three footer files, a header file, 1 sidebar for the blog, and then 3 custom post types, because we also talked about a front page slider, the testimonials, which I already mentioned, and galleries, because it's a photography website. That was the last one. So after you've worked that out and everyone agrees, the design phase, this is where you're not going to do quite as much, but I think it's really important to be available for the designer for questions. So if they are thinking of designing something and wondering if you can actually build that, it's good to be available for them to ask you that. I would also, if you can, but tread lightly with this question, ask them if you can see the sample or the full design before they send it to the client, because then you're not promising the client something that you can't actually build. And the way that you're going to get the designer to do this is to promise to show them the development before you send it to the client. So in the development phase where you're going to be doing most of your work, again, once it's done, I really recommend you show the site to the designer before you show it to the client. It's only fair if they show you the design. And it also ensures that the client is actually going to see what they signed off on as far as the design is concerned. This is sort of a note from that I've learned the hard way, is make sure you comb through the site very, very carefully, probably one more time than you think you need to before you show it to the designer, because you don't want to get a 3-page email and a pissed off designer because you didn't do that one last check of all the details. I would recommend you get a good night's sleep before you do that one as well. And then I would, with all of this sort of, you know, you're giving a lot to the designer here, but you also want to limit them a little bit and ask them to only send you one round of changes, one email, so that you can go through it and check them off, and it's not like 20 emails driving you bananas. So this is an example of where I finished a site, and I might have put this slide in the wrong spot. Yeah, I did. Hang on. We'll go back. So revisions phase. So once you've sent the site to the designer, and they're going to come back at you with hopefully one lovely, concise email that isn't too long, you will, like I said, if you both communicated during the process, that email shouldn't be very long. If you can't do something, explain why you can't do it. And I think that's where developers sometimes just say, I can't do that, and throw their hands up and don't explain why. It's a good reason to explain why is that they won't give you the same comment every single time you do a website together, which will get super annoying for you. And going backwards in time here, an example of something that happened on this particular site is the designer said to me, at the bottom of the pages there's an arrow with more testimonials, can we take that out? This was not in her design. So what she's talking about is on the testimonials page, so this is my taxonomy PHP, there's this more testimonials, which as developers we all know serves a purpose. This is a custom post type, so you're going back to see more testimonials under this custom post type. So we're not loading every single testimonial this person has ever had on the one page. And so I wrote her back and said, well, here's a long thing, but I was basically explaining that I'd be a little worried about that page load speed if we were listing absolutely everything. Options could be to add more but not all testimonials, or add an infinite scroll, and then I also told her that infinite scroll is not as easy for me, but you know, I'm open to whatever. And then we pulled the client in on this one and decided that we were going to just put a few more testimonials up per page, and that was solved. But then there were also, you know, the nitpicky things about like leading and that kind of thing. So then in the launch phase, I think especially when you're first starting to work with a designer, ask them what the muddy points in working together were. So by muddy points, I mean the stuff they didn't understand or what was frustrating for them, so that you can iron this stuff out. And it never hurts to buy the first round of drinks post-launch. Also help you maybe get more projects with the designer if you actually liked working with them and this all worked for you. So to get towards wrapping up anyway, general tips for making this relationship even easier. You have to set limits with each other, and I think from the developer to the designer, cap the number of modules, again, really I mean files, for the layout early on. So something like, I'm only willing to do 3-page templates, 5 headers or footers, not 5 headers and 5 footers, 2 sidebars, whatever it is, tell them what you're willing to do and explain it in terms that they actually understand. So pages, again, and less about the files. Agree on a grid system. I have a feeling Christine's going to say this too. So this is sort of the general one that I use. This is very, very basic, but a width of 1024 pixels. I always develop my sites responsively, so this is the max width of the main website anyway. Content width of 62.5% or 640 pixels. Margin between of 25% or 24 pixels, and a sidebar of 35% or 380 pixels. Content width, I also would ask them on pages where there aren't sidebars to keep that width consistent as well. So for one thing, it's a nice line length for reading for people when they're looking at the website. And it also keeps that sort of visual consistency throughout the pages, which the designer really should be paying attention to, but it's a nice reminder and a good idea to get on the same page about that. Content headings must be consistent and make use of H1 through H6 and the P tag. I realize this is like grade 1, page 2, but designers don't necessarily know about this, that in HTML and in WordPress, especially in the WYSIWYG editor, you have 6 headers, and you may as well make sure that they're consistent across the pages. This is something I have a lot of trouble getting designers to do for some reason. A little tip for them, if they're using Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign, you can use paragraph styles to achieve this. So if you create a paragraph style in any one of those programs, that's going to keep your headings consistent throughout the whole layout of your site. And I would also remind them that margin bottom changes the heading style. So even if they have the same headings but a different margin bottom, that means a different heading. I think designers don't think that way because it's just a hard return for them. But for us, it's a whole other line of CSS. So I'd also ask them to agree to a color palette of no more than 6 colors. Again, a good designer should know this, but it's worth repeating just to be safe. Ask them to agree to 2 or 3 fonts, preferably from the same foundry to prevent JavaScript conflicts or any conflicts in general. That's one I've had a lot of struggles with in the past. And then, of course, you have to do some things to keep the designer happy. If you're going to demand this kind of stuff from your designer, you have to do some things for them. So I really like to use custom post types to keep the design consistent as far as I tend to have very similar clients all the time. So there's always testimonials and there are always that kind of thing. And I find, for one thing, if I use custom post types for that sort of thing, the client's really happy because it's easy for them. It also means that I can keep the way each of those looks really consistent, and that makes the designer happy, instead of having the client just plunk it all into a page and hope that the spacing comes out right and that they put the file, like the images in at the right size, because they never do. So it's good to use custom post types to mitigate that. Obviously, cross-browser test, but explain to the designer and the client that cross-browser testing means that the site will look its best in that browser, not necessarily that it will look the same in every single browser. Find out which browser the designer is using and ask them to update it. This is something I've had a lot of trouble with, using Firefox from 6 versions ago and asking me why something looks funny, and this is what we finally got down to, is the browser hadn't been updated. This is something I just discovered today. I was making the WYSIWYG editor more client-proof by just throwing a function in there to add it so that there was only the palette that the designer had picked. But apparently that's not allowed in 3.9 anymore, or my function didn't work. So I found this tiny MCE color picker. I'm not in love with it yet, but or probably ever, but it's there. So you can set a palette for the WYSIWYG editor, so the client hopefully won't put like some crazy orange in the middle of this lovely design that has nothing to do with orange. And then finally, if you're a subcontractor under the designer, I would consider sending the designer weekly updates on your progress during the build, just so they don't think you've disappeared off the face of the earth and aren't doing anything. Because that's something I think clients, in my case, clients really struggle with, is if I'm building a site for them for 4 weeks and they don't hear from me, for all they know, I could be in Hawaii or something. I would also suggest, if you're not subcontracting, to do this to the client, but this is a talk about designers and developers. So as far as responsive design is concerned, designers usually think of things as static, and I'm not talking about positioning in CSS. I'm talking about it just should stay the way it is. Of course, we all know that that's not really realistic. So you need to remind designers that the text needs to be able to reflow. I get comments all the time about widows and orphans. Widows and orphans are like, well, there's one on my page. that easier, that's a widow. So a hanging word at the bottom or top of a page, designers hate that, but you can't really do anything about it in web design. So they just need to deal. Again, using a proper grid will make coding for responsive sites much easier. So thinking about how everything will sort of fall on top of each other on a phone. And I would also suggest determining earlier on how much involvement the designer wants to have in the responsive part of the site. My particular designer that I work with doesn't want to do it, so I take care of that part of it. But if she was really getting into designing for iPhones, etc., that might be a bit bigger of an issue for us because we'd have to start talking about that way earlier on. So the main things, if you only take away a few things from me tonight, is instead of getting frustrated, help the designer understand how WordPress works, because they just don't know. Try to get designers to think of the page as modular instead of one page. Get involved in the process earlier than usually developers are. Create the information architecture with the client if you can, or take the lead on that anyway. Agree on some basics, so grid, limited color palette, font. Again, a good designer should be doing this for you, but if you see that they're not, it might be a good idea to have a conversation about. And when everything else goes wrong, communicate. You just have to keep talking to each other, emailing, whatever, and figuring it out. And that's it. So any questions or discussions or anything?
No questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
What tips do you have for about non-WordPress sites? Like designers and developers work together for non-WordPress sites, or like for static sites? Same rules apply.
Yeah, I think all the same rules apply. I guess you wouldn't have to worry so much about the modular stuff that I was talking about, but as far as like the communication, the process, it all should work the same way, I think, regardless of what type of CMS or not CMS you're using. Yeah.
Actually, mine was a freelancing designer working on a browser.
Yeah.
That I've seen designers doing it, working on the browser. Do a little bit of designing the way the browser allows you.
Yeah.
So if design needs to change something up to build something, then you just test it and you work on the browser style and the risk of going back to Photoshop or Illustrator and do something that is actually going to take a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, my issue with that, I guess, is the designer I work with knows not a line of code, so that would be impossible. But, I mean, she and I rarely, it would be pretty rare that if there was some small tweak, she wouldn't be able to just explain it to me over the phone or over email, and it would be good. But I know some designers do work in the, sorry, my eye is watering. I know some designers do work in the browser. I haven't had a lot of luck with that just because I find it frustrating. I can't work as quickly as I could in like InDesign or something, but I don't know. I think that's just personal preference.
What's your comment on the trend right now for coders to say, oh, designers should learn how to code?
Sorry, what was the question? Designers?
What's your opinion right now? There's a lot of talk about developers saying, oh, all designers should learn how to code.
I think so. I mean, that's certainly the road I took. But I think if that's the case, then developers also need to learn a little bit more about design. Like, it's got to go both ways. So, and I think probably in some ways it's easier to learn about design than development. So, yeah. Anything else? Okay.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, let's take just a 2-minute break while we switch to computer and get some break.
On the screen.
Oh, I think it's.
Uh-oh. Oh, okay. My dock is still there. How do I get my... Okay. Leave this here. It's just... You good?
Yeah.
Anybody else need something from the fridge before I start? No? Okay, so nobody wants a break? You're all good? Okay, so my name is Christine, and the reason I wanted to piggyback on Kate's talk is because I'm one of those developers. I work with designers, and I never ever get involved in the process. I just get PSDs, and I just make it work. And I actually like that. I get to work with all sorts of designers. I find that, you know, it's almost like Christmas. I never know what's coming. Some designs are beautiful. Some designs are weird. Some designs are just, there's no words. But most of them are great. Like, I really, really learn a lot from it, and I love it. So Kate mentioned quite a few things, tips and tricks and tools to make that development design process easier. And essentially, it comes down to communicating. If you're a good communicator, if you can articulate your thoughts and your emotions and perhaps keep some of those emotions down, then you know, it's fine. It's great. So what I want to do is I want to share a case study about a project that I was on last year. And that project was a bit chaotic. It was a bit, it was a mess. Now, looking back at it now, like, I'm looking at it going, like, it wasn't that bad. But at the time, I felt like this was the worst project in the world. And it was just like everything went wrong. So I will share that with you. Now, before I do, I should just tell you a little bit about myself, because not everybody here knows me. So I've been a freelancer since 2002. And initially, well, when I started, you know, I did HTML and tables, and then I migrated to movable type, and then when movable type
launched their fantastic new approach, I migrated to WordPress because that's what everybody else was doing. And I've been working with WordPress since 2004. I only started working with WordPress as a CMS probably around 2006, 7. Before I was just using it mainly as a blog. But the platform's really evolved since then. And so I've been immersed in WordPress for a very long time. And like I said at the beginning, I work mainly for agencies and designers. I don't do any branding. I don't do any site architecture, content strategy, content writing, all that stuff. I don't do any of it. In my opinion, I do the easy part. I get the Photoshop file, and then I just make it work. And so I also rarely meet the final client. So if, let's say, Beata hires Nick, hires Nick, and then Beata is my client, I never get to meet Nick. So I just, the final client is just, to me, is just like someone who was hired, and I'm just here to help out my client. So last year, I was hired by a company. We'll just call this company Company A. And they had a project that had gone on for a very, very long time. The design had been very, very difficult. The process had been difficult. People had gone on holidays. And so this project was long overdue, and it just needed to get it done. So the Company A had been engaged by Company B to design a new website. They already had a website. They already had a WordPress website. But Company B's organization had changed, so some of the functionality was different. And they needed to have different structure, different content, and they just needed a different website. But there was no branding involved. Now, one of the key things that they wanted was that on their blog, they wanted to feature contributors. So this organization has people writing blog posts in their company, but they also have guest contributors. So they really wanted to feature the number of people who are writing for this organization. So that was a key element of this project. So what I got was, of course, the functionality document, the content, the website, the current website, and the PST files. And so what I got was something like this, which obviously is not that. I mean, I stripped out the design for this talk because knowing who Company A and Company B is really irrelevant here. So I just wanted to keep that all clean and not show you the design. So here, this is the front page. There's nothing too dramatic here. The header has all the usual suspect, logo, navigation, search. The footer has all the widgets, search bar, social media stuff is in there. Of course, there's a carousel because, God, we all have to have carousels, so that's fine, regardless of what you think of carousels. But then the main part of the home page is the blog post. So we have the latest blog post, which has a large image, the image of the author, and then the heading of the post, and then the excerpt. Nothing difficult there. And then the next 3 posts. So 3 posts, picture of the authors, because those are very important, and then headings and the excerpt. And then a read more button. I guess the feature post, you could have like a post that's tagged with a feature category, or you can have a sticky post, or you could just have the latest one. Like there's all sorts of ways that you could do that, but there's nothing too difficult. Now, so in my head, so as a developer, I'm thinking WordPress template, so to me, this is the front page. And when you click on read more, that'll take you to the blog, and so that'll be the index.php, right? So what I got when I clicked on the blog PSD is something like this. So I have the same blog heading, and then I have the same featured article at the top. The latest 2 articles are now moved position, and then we have another block underneath, which is a different query pulling different posts from our contributors, and then a button at the bottom that says archives. And so that's when I scratched my head and I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, how weren't we on the front page? We're told to click read more, and then we get to this page and we get 3 posts. We had 4 on the home page. Now we only have 3. And how do I get to the latest posts? Like, this is not the blog. This is not the blog format. So at this stage, I decided to go to company A, speak to the project manager, and say, okay, I don't understand. Can you explain how this works? Maybe I'm missing something. Company A was mostly a Drupal shop, so maybe this is a Drupal thing. I don't know. But from a usability point of view, it doesn't make any sense. How do you get to the posts? Now, going back to Kate's talk, we can understand, like, we have to realize that designers don't understand templates. So this is not something that I can just say, WordPress templates don't work this way, aren't, like, you're an idiot. Like, that's not the right approach. WordPress students and WordPress developers have trouble with WordPress templates. So we can't criticize designers for not understanding templates. But from a usability point of view, this just didn't make any sense. So that's when I got a bit of more information about the design, the whole project. The project manager then told me that the person in charge at company B, who they had been dealing with, was really difficult to work with. There was a lot of angry emails, there were a lot of shouting matches, I think there were even some tears at one point. And I might have said in my blur that somebody got fired, but that's an exaggeration. Nobody got fired, but there were a lot of emotions, and at the end, I think everybody was just frustrated, and the designer was frustrated. And so what they did is that they presented multiple home pages, and this was just a home page, but they liked it. So like, oh, let's use that for the blog page. So we've all been there. We've all had Frankenstein designs, and as this is when a developer should have been present at the meeting saying, okay, this is not going to work. But I think that, or I wasn't there, but I don't think a developer was there to walk the people through. Now, I'm not sure what happened and why company B was so difficult to work with, but in the end, that's what they wanted. So I was told, okay, well, this is what they want, so make it work. So I did what I usually do, and that, in this case, is that I coded the rest of the site. I just did the contact page, there was a portfolio page, project page, header, footer, all the blogs, single post, comments, and there was like accordions in there and a bunch of sliders. And then I kept thinking about this, thinking like, maybe I'm missing something. I don't understand how this works. Maybe it's just me. Maybe there's a way to make this work. And what I ended up doing was I thought, okay, this contributor section here on the home page or on the blog page is really important. So I need to keep this, but I'm going to take it and I'm going to move it to the sidebar. That way it's up there and it's prominent, and they can still access it, and they can still feature those contributors. And then what I did is I took the article, the main article, I left it as is, but I rejigged those, the latest one, I just made them look the same way as the contributors, and I displayed more. So what I ended up with something like this. It's kind of the same, but not quite the same. And what I wanted to do is I just, first of all, I got rid of the button that says archives. To me, archives is like, it's in the attic, nobody uses it, it's like, it's dusty, don't go there. So I just put load more, and I used infinite scroll to just load more posts. So that way they would load more posts, and hopefully they would be happy that the contributors were still on the page, but we're a little bit more on the side. So I presented this, and what I did then is I presented this to the project manager. I don't have access to company B, so I didn't get involved in that. But I sold them on this idea, thinking like, I think this is the best we can do. So now, throughout this entire process, the person who had been very, very problematic at company B left. So maybe maybe they got fired. I'm trying to say they and them instead of he and she. It's really difficult. Trying to do non-sexist talks, which is really hard. So yeah, that person left. We don't know what happened to that person. Maybe they went to the Bahamas. Maybe they got married. I don't know. But all of a sudden, we had a new person. It's like, awesome, a new person is coming into the project. They have never seen any of this. They might have their entire new opinions. What are they going to say? Well, lucky for us, they were delightful. They loved everything about it, and they even offered some suggestions. So, for example, one of them was like, featuring the contributors is a great idea, but in our organization, we have people that write articles all the time. So we might have John writing like 662 articles, and then Bob only has one. So do we really want to have in the sidebar, like Bob has one, John has 662. So let's not have that in the sidebar. Let's just show the names, and then we can have the link. Those links to the name can just take you to the author's page. So they suggested little things like that, which was really like just minor edits, and then we were able to launch the site, and everybody was happy. So in the end, like this wasn't a huge, difficult project, but at the time it felt very difficult. But what it did, though, is that it really made me think. I mean, if you think about it, if all the time you're given like wonderful clients that just never challenge you, you just never grow. And so sometimes it's good to like face difficult clients. I'm not saying like go and seek difficult clients, but when you do have problematic clients, you can actually learn a lot from them. It's either learning that you're never going to work with that person again, or you're never going to talk to anybody this way, or mistakes that you made along the way that really helped you learn and as a person. And finally, I had another thing, and I forget what it is now. I think that's That's it. That's all for now. Once again, my name's Christine, and I'm Blue Line Media on Twitter, if you want to know more. I'm trying to think of what my last thing was. I can't remember. One more thing. I forget. So, anybody have questions for either Kate, myself? I have a question for you. Flynn is always looking for people to present. So, if you want to present about some amazing project that you've worked on, or some new tool or new technique, I'm sure Flynn would like to know. And you all know that WordCamp Vancouver speaker was announced. So if you want to speak at WordCamp, you can submit your application. Nothing, really very quiet. Oh, very quiet.